Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's Passion to Profession podcast. I'm so excited today because we have the wonderful Nick Loper with us. He is the chief side hustler at sidehustlenation.com. He also is the host of an amazing podcast called The Side Hustle Show. Nick has made it his mission to help people build job-free income streams. He did not want to climb the corporate ladder, but he wanted to build his own. Isn't that exciting? So, Nick, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Doing well, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Can we start with a little bit of your story, your background, in case the listeners haven't heard of you before?
You bet. So I'll try to give the quick version. So I was bit by the entrepreneurial bug in college when I had a house painting internship. So I spent a couple summers painting houses in Seattle, Washington, or outside of Seattle. Following graduation, I did get a corporate job. I was working at Ford, kind of like at the bottom rung of this like massive global automaker. During that time, I built a comparison shopping site for footwear. It was called shoesniper.com in its latest iteration. Ran that for years and years. That was the vehicle that let me quit that corporate job. On the side from selling shoes on the internet, I started Side Hustle Nation and the Side Hustle Show podcast several years later, and have been doing that ever since. Within a year and a half, that kind of like the shoe business kind of phased out and the side hustle stuff kind of became the main focus, and lots of different projects and experiments along the way.
Nice. That is a short version. I love it. A lot of our listeners and audience, some of them have already got their side hustle. Some of them have turned their side hustle into their main hustle. And some are, in that 9 to 5 and they're looking to like start something. And so let's start with that last crowd there. What would you say are the first steps if someone wants to really get into, launching a side hustle?
Well, I would say you're already a step ahead of a lot of people by consuming this type of content. Like what you put in your earbuds, like how are you spending your free time? Like you have the choice of what you consume, and you're consuming Dan's material, something like educational, something positive, something like proactive to get off the sidelines. I think that is a really important first step. Where I normally tell people to go is, a skills inventory, right? What have you gotten paid to do in the past, or what are you getting paid to do currently? And what have you learned to do outside of work? And the important thing here is like, don't discount, the skills that you take for granted, because once you know something, it's hard to imagine not knowing it. It's like, well, 2 + 2, of course, but a lot of people, like, that stuff doesn't necessarily come as easy to them, or they might pay to have somebody else do that for them. So like, don't discount that stuff. And the second thing to consider, like, what are the problems or challenges or hurdles that you've overcome in your own life that you hear other people complaining about, or that you just face on a day-to-day basis. I have an exercise I call what sucks. And this is where you just put on your pessimist hat for, a day or a week or 2 weeks at a time. And you're kind of making a note in your notes app of like, what were the little annoyances, right? Because on the other side of that, there might be a business idea, there might be a profit opportunity. And just to give you an example, like a recent guest on the show, her inspiration struck while she was out picking up her dog's poop in the backyard. She's like, this is kind of a tedious chore. I don't really love doing this. But you know what? If it's a pain for me, it probably is a pain for other people. And if I was getting paid to do it, I probably wouldn't dislike it so much. And then when we connected for the podcast, she had 80 something recurring weekly customers, like recurring revenue, $15. She was making like $1,000 a week from this. And now she's grown it even beyond that and hired people to go out and do the dirty work. And she's building this fleet of like bright pink pooper scooper trucks. Like, it's awesome.
I love that. I think it's really hard for entrepreneurial minded people to put on the pessimist hat because they're, we're problem solvers. That's why we do it, right? But it's so cool to like think, you know what, give yourself that permission. Just think about what sucks, because it's going to suck for other people as well.
I remember my kid this summer, and I was like really proud of him for thinking it, because like our pool was closed all summer. We didn't get to go swimming once because of COVID. And he's like, well, what if we had like a waterproof mask? Then we could like go to the pool. It's like, well, see, there's, you're coming up with solutions to this pain point of yours. I was like, that's good.
That's awesome. Now, what about the other end of the spectrum? What is like a bad side hustle? What do you see people doing and you think, oh no, don't do that. That's not going to work.
Uh, Probably at the top of that list is network marketing, just for the sake, and they're not to say these companies are all scams, but it's been well documented. The failure rate in network marketing is far greater than in other small business channels. So if you are attracted to this, and I get why they're attracted, like, look, it's kind of like a business in the box setup. Like you've done a lot of the legwork for you. All you have to go out and do is find customers. Where people failed here is like they tap out their network, right? It's either a product their network doesn't care about, isn't interested in, and then they have no way of like growing beyond that. And so it just kind of stalls out. So if that appeals to you, there are plenty of other business models that you can emulate and try and follow in the footsteps of, that, I think in the States, the SBA puts out like, well, 50% of businesses fail within, their first year. But like for network marketing, it's like 99%. It's like not even a comparison. So that's probably what I would avoid. I would avoid spending a ton of money up front in an unproven business. I got a note from somebody, this was a couple of years ago now. It's like, well, I've invested $30,000 into my website and it's almost ready to launch. And I'm like, whoa, yeah, just like, do you have a customer? Like what, just that stuff kind of stresses me out. The other question to ask here is, what if it works? So, like the poop scooping example is an interesting one because, like, what if it works? Like, well, then I'm scooping poop all day. Like, that doesn't sound that great either. But no, she's managed to pivot it, back to kind of more of a management and marketing role. Um, so ask yourself, what if it works? And the example would be, like, you find these on Side Hustle Nation too, because like for whatever reason people like are into them. These little like survey apps where you're like, oh, I'll just answer a few questions like while I'm watching TV, perfectly fine, perfectly viable way to make a few extra bucks. But like your effective hourly rate on that is like almost nothing. And it's like, okay, that appeals to some people, but it's like, that's not going to be a job replacing income stream. So you have to ask yourself, well, what does success look like here? What if it works?
Yeah, I love that. Regarding like investing too much up front, something if people are like really deep in our community, they know that like the first thing we teach people to do is within 2 weeks of starting with us, we say like launch your first version. We call it your first pancake, because people work for months or years and invest thousands on like this idea they have before they go out and show the world. And really what matters much more than what you think is anyone willing to pay for it, right?
Right.
Absolutely. Can you tell me, once you've got that side hustle, let's say people have got the right thing that they want to do, how do you make it a profitable enterprise? What are some of the things people need to think about?
So it comes down to two things, maybe three things, but it comes down to traffic and conversion. And this can be offline, online, but like traffic being, who do you interact with? How many people see your stuff? And then you can ask yourself those kind of marketing questions of like, well, how do I like marketing 101, like how do I get in front of my people in their natural habitat, like where they're already doing business? So I have a theory like I call buy buttons, where that says like, look, there's cash flowing in a bunch of different marketplaces. If you want to get some of that, go where the cash is already flowing. Maybe that's Amazon, maybe that's eBay, maybe that's Udemy, maybe it's YouTube, maybe it's iTunes, like, right? There's like all these mini search engines or these like micro marketplaces for your type of product or service, right? It's like, okay, see if you can get in front of your customers where they're already doing business, right? For me, like I did pretty well on Fiverr for a lot of years. Like it was like just random, but it's like, the light bulb went off. Like this is a search engine, and importantly, it's a search engine for buyers. So that's kind of like the traffic side of it. Like, okay, how do I get more people kind of through the front door, and then maybe in the doorway itself is the conversion piece. Like this is the trust factors, this is the social proof factors, this is the what's your offer, right? Is it compelling enough that people want to buy it? And industry standard conversion rate metrics are going to vary off by industry, but it's like that's something you should pay attention to, like of the percentage of people who are exposed to your offer, like how many end up taking you up on it, how many people end up buying it. And I think it's going to, whether it's high end, whether it's low end, like, of course, there's a bunch of different variables, but like something to track over time, because you can tweak and experiment and see if that made any impact. Somebody once shared with me that like Amazon is at any given time running like 1,000 different tests on their sites. And it doesn't surprise me at all. And it's like, if a 0.1% improvement, right? Like this is like, it's the most optimized, well-oiled machine out there. And so it doesn't surprise me at all. But you can run kind of these micro experiments on your own business, on your own life. And then maybe once you're through the threshold, through the door, is this economics piece. And this comes from Perry Marshall's tactical triangle, where he talks about traffic, conversion, and economics. The economics is how much you charge. This is, you know, is this product worth $100? Is it worth $1,000? And he goes into the power laws and the 80/20s. Like if, a certain percentage of people are willing to pay you $1,000 for this thing, a certain percentage of those are willing to pay you 10,000 for, more intimate access, for, more hand holding, for whatever it is. So that's kind of how I approach once you have an offer, once you have something, once you have an idea, something to sell, I kind of look at it through that tactical triangle lens to try and increase revenue and profits there.
Mm. What about pricing then? Because while there might be people out there willing to pay 1,000, 10,000, sometimes it's scary to charge that much. We feel we're not worth it. We have the imposter syndrome. We look at competition. We're in the app space. We help our customers create mobile apps, and then sometimes they'll create something and say, well, Netflix is like $8 a month, so maybe I can charge 5. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you want to be charging 200 because you're giving them this value. Think about the value people are getting, not what competition is out there or whatever. How do you think about pricing?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I am very much like that. Like, I don't want to charge too much. I want to make it accessible. But at the same time, pricing is kind of a marketing element too. Like people go out and buy the expensive cars, the expensive handbags, because they cost so much. Like it's a status symbol in a way. Um, that's an interesting point. And I like that comparison between Netflix. It reminds me, I don't know if you ever played like the Rich Dad Poor Dad, like cash flow board game, where like when this thing first came out, I mean, it's like a version of Monopoly in a way, where your goal is to escape the rat race. When it first came out, like this board game was like $100, $200. Like, well, I could go buy Scrabble for 15 at Target, and it was like, but it was this marketing point of differentiation. He was like, well, what are you going to take away from this skill? It's like, this is the skill of investing and thinking differently about money. And it's like, so it's not just a board game. And so I don't know. I'm guilty of probably pricing too low in a lot of stuff. So I'm not the best person to ask about this, but think about it in turn. I think you're framing on thinking about it in terms of the value you're going to provide, and you can learn that through customer conversations. Like, hey, what's this biggest pain point? If we were to make that go away, what would that be worth to you, right? And so they may anchor at something like, oh gosh, we're spending 10 grand a month, or they may anchor it at something much higher than you had expected.
Yeah, I agree, and also I think what's important to think about is the pain of inaction, right? So if they don't take action on this thing, often spending money, investing holds us accountable to actually doing something. So if you sell something free or cheap, maybe they don't take action. Maybe there's more pain of inaction down the road. Pricing
Right.
can even help and quite often does help your customers achieve better results or appreciate what they've got more, you
Yes,
know?
I bought this thing, I invested in this thing, and now I'm going to pay
Yeah,
more attention to it than, the
yeah,
dozen free YouTube videos that are out there.
exactly. So looking ahead to next year, if you think about side hustles and how this whole thing is evolving, we've had in 2020, we've had COVID, which has completely changed the employment landscape and where everyone works. And um, do you see the 9 to 5 dying? What do you see next year and beyond?
That's a good. I mean, I don't see the 9 to 5 dying. I think, I mean, pre-COVID, despite all of the, robotics and AI and automation, like we had like record low unemployment numbers. So like things were booming, and so I don't see the 9 to 5 going away. What I do see is part of this larger shift towards kind of a free agent or freelancer economy, where you got to have the skills to be able to cut your own paycheck. And this idea of relying on one employer for decades and then retiring is becoming a little bit outdated. And if that works, sorry, like if that works for you, and like my wife has been at the same company for 15 years, and my dad's been, my dad is probably more typical of his generation, same company for his almost his whole career. But most of our friends, like in the time that she's been at that job, our other friend, like I don't even know what company like it's always in sales, but like he's jumping around every 6 to 18 months. Like okay, I don't know. But more importantly then is just like learning the skills of being able to figure out a service to offer, figuring out a product to sell, figuring out how to create content, build an audience, build a following online, and then figuring out how to monetize those skills like through real customer conversations. I think that is something that is probably the surefire way to recession proof yourself for the inevitable or maybe the lack of job security that you may find down the road.
Mm. And I would also love to just talk about a podcast for a second, because a lot of our network, a lot of our audience talk about, hey, I want to start a podcast, and actually the Passion to Profession podcast, when we started it, we simply interviewed our most successful customers. We live streamed it to our other customers just so they could see this is what the most successful people are doing. And so for us, we just started this whole thing to solve a problem, and then it's sort of grown from there. Now, you have over 113,000 listeners for your show, which is just awesome. Congratulations. What are your key takeaways there about if someone's sort of earlier in that journey?
If they're an aspiring or a newer podcast host?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Oh man, I'll geek out on this stuff all day. So a couple things to consider here. So the podcast landscape has obviously changed over the last 5-6 years with the invasion of big media and big money. Right now, you have ESPN and NPR and the New York Times. Like people have recognized that it's a thing. Now that is good and bad. The good news is they're bringing more people into the fold, and more people have yet to discover podcasts than probably already know what they are, right? Like there's another 50% of the market who have never listened to a podcast still left to conquest. So I think that is a good sign. The other thing to be aware of there is, you're never going to be able to compete with the production staff of 14 people and like the production quality that goes into some of these shows. So you got to compete on content. How I think about competing on content is this listener pyramid. So you imagine you got your pyramid, it's strangers, listeners, subscribers, fans, right? And every step of the way, everything that you do related to marketing and producing the show is how to ascend people up that pyramid. So for me, at the very top is the fans. And these are the people who I've changed their lives. They've made more money as a result of taking action based on something on the show. That's a fan for life. Like they are the evangelists. They go out and spread the word because like, hey, I am better off now as a result of having listening to this. But it's an uphill battle to convert those strangers. I mean, the strangers is the biggest piece of the pyramid. It's like people who don't know you exist. How do you reach them? And so it goes back to like kind of the marketing stuff. Like, how do I find them where they're already doing business? Maybe that's through SEO. Maybe that's through Facebook communities. Maybe that's through LinkedIn, or maybe it's through YouTube, or maybe it's through guesting on other shows. Lots of different ways to kind of address that. But then on, ascending those people to subscribers is like, there's a lot, we get into like the delivery of the show and the different segments and calls to action and stuff. What was really effective for me for a lot of years was creating a episode specific lead magnet or summary of the show. And that was the lead magnet. It was like, hey, you're out walking the dog, you're at the gym, you're driving in your car, you're not in a good place to take notes. Don't worry, we did it for you. You can go over here and download those. And so that was an email opt-in. It took me a year and a half to figure that out. But within 3 months of doing that, I had tripled the email subscribers. Within 6 months, it was 6x. It was a big inflection point. I'm playing around with some different opt-ins now because that, like, a PDF, said no one ever. So I'm trying to think of different ways to convert listeners to subscribers now, because that's one of the biggest frustrations. Is such an anonymous medium. You get really poor analytics on who these people are, who's tuning in, all that stuff. So trying to get those people onto your list, really, really important. Maybe that's a free mini course, whatever, like lots of different things can work there. And then from, what was that? So that was listeners to subscribers. So think of that pyramid: strangers, listeners, like getting people to tune in for that first time, getting them to subscribe, and then, converting that person into a fan. It's kind of how I think about climbing the podcast ladder there.
I love that. And where do you go from fans? Because, a lot of so our audience are looking for, like, they want to make income, of course, and so how do you take a fan to a client or, a customer?
Yeah, and these fans are the most likely to buy your products and services. They're the most likely to evangelize and share and bring more people back, into the base of the pyramid. Um, so that's kind of what has worked for me. So I use the show, kind of infrequently, but as calls to action for my own products and services. And so the fans are the ones that take action on that. So that's kind of how I have done that. And by virtue of having the email list, hopefully, see, this is something, I mean, we can talk about this. So for years, like the majority of the email list was podcast listeners. And those are my people. Like they're in it for the long haul. Like they've got this entrepreneurial mindset. They're learning all these different side hustles. Love it. And when I stopped doing the PDFs, that kind of shifted to now the email list is more coming from just like blog traffic, which is much more transactional. And it's like, I'm happy to have those subscribers, but like, it's a little bit of a different mindset. Somebody who spends, 3-4 minutes kind of scrolling through the bullet points of your blog post and then seeing the opt-in form at the bottom. It's like, okay, sure, I'll subscribe to this. It's a little bit of a different, not to say subscribers are poor quality, but it's like, it's a different level of engagement. So I think those podcast listeners are really, really valuable to have. Somebody spends 30-40 minutes with you in their earbuds. They do it week after week. It's a really powerful relationship.
Right. You feel like I recently listened to Michelle Obama's book. That's my most recent audio book, not a
Okay.
podcast, but similar, right? After like 12 hours or whatever, I feel like me and Michelle are like friends. If I saw her, I'd be like, hey, and then I'd be like, oh no, you have no idea who I am, right? Because you create such a relationship in that time.
That's good. I didn't know she narrated it herself. That's cool.
She does. Yeah, she does. I'm going to download the Barack Obama one that's just come out as well. I'm going to
Nice.
get his side of the story.
Cool.
Nice. Hey, thank you so much. Nick, I know that our audience will have got so much value from this, so I know that they'll want to learn more, subscribe to your show. Where can they follow you?
Would love to have you tune into the Side Hustle Show. You'll find it in any podcast player app. SideHustleNation.com is the home base for all things blog and membership related.
You heard it, guys. That was Nick Loper. Thank you so much for the time, Nick. And thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, everybody. And see you very soon.